two ways of communication, one direct and the other one is more API driven, which developers expect to have. With direct, I think they're looking for something more um, straight out.
All right. So, hello, everyone. Hello to all our listeners, and welcome to another episode of SourceLife. Today, we have Ran. Ran, he is the CTO and co-founder of Epsagon, which got acquired in 2021 by Cisco for $500 million. Epsagon gives you more uh, observability over microservices. And frankly, we're just glad to have you here, Ran. And we also have Tomer, the CEO, sorry, of Novo. So hi, Tomer and Ran. How you guys doing?
Awesome. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for being here, on.
So, a few words about myself. So, it's true, I'm the co-founder and CTO at Epsagon. As you mentioned, we're doing observability for microservices, Kubernetes, serverless, basically helping engineers to troubleshoot their software better when something goes wrong, because always something goes wrong at some point.
Always.
And right now we're part of Cisco, doing the same strategy, but bigger, larger, etc. The Cisco scale.
Okay, so let's just jump straight to the first question that I would like us to discuss. And the question is, what is the right message we need to pass to developers, and how does it differ from between just like a message to a developer and an R&D leader?
That's a great question. I'll start with the first one. What's the right messaging for developers? In very one short answer, it should be concrete, it should be specific, it should be accurate. Developers are very picky. They hate buzzwords, they hate fluffy type of messaging. So you need to be very concrete. You need to speak, for example, we help you troubleshoot problems in your Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to note about engineers is they are getting into details really quickly. So if you're choosing to advertise to them because it's part of your go-to-market strategy, you better off be able to talk to them into great details. Otherwise, you're going to get conveyed as some sort of a salesperson. And I haven't met any salesperson actually able to sell to developer.
Okay. And the second question is how it's differ between just a developer and a message to an R&D leader.
So when you're speaking to a developer, you need to speak on day-to-day issues, something that they encounter on, how long it took them to troubleshoot some bug, or the pain of implementing something new or scaling software, something that is more day-to-day problem messaging. And when you're targeting an R&D leader, not necessarily a team lead, it can also be a director or a VP level, you should speak more to the overall engineering culture and overall engineering organization as part of it. And it should be a message of how do you look at your development velocity in the entire org, how much you're spending time on issues across the organization, what's your mean time to response. That's as an example from our ecosystem of observability.
So before Tomer will add his kind of view, I just want to construct this. So developers, the message to them should be their like day-to-day pain points and what actually kind of interrupts their flow of like just tackling and dealing with different issues. And the message to an R&D lead is basically we need to look at the big picture and tackle the big picture stuff. So he could really look toward the uh, cross and organization kind of problems, right?
Yeah, correct. Usually when you're trying to, not necessarily sell, but engage someone on their problems, you should really much take a look into what are their problems, what are their pains. And in engineers and developers usually tend to be more of individual contributors, which means you should own on what their actual problems day to day. That might be the way they're able to develop, how much of the time is wasted on meetings, how much they can actually develop as a as opposed to actually talk to other people. They usually are not really much into the business side. They want to solve intellectual problems. They want to design the system. That's their forte. That's what they want to do. And VP R&Ds or directors or someone who is a bit higher level within the organization are looking how are my developers are able to develop more quickly. How can we ship more code? How can I make sure we have a good enough engineering culture that we're able to bring on more engineers? So problems tend to be a bit diverged.
Do you think that having this kind of a message to developers slash R&D leader should be in the same place? Like, should it be in, if we say, for instance, like a landing page or something, or like a header for an article or anything like this, should it be concrete to only developers or concrete only to R&D leaders, or it could be some kind of a mix there?
I think at early stages, you should focus on areas where engineers are more likely or more tend to believe you. Everything should be concrete. It's not how we make your business better, it's how we help you write better tests that will cause your downtimes to be less significant, for example. So I would say there are different mediums where, or different channels where you usually speak to developers, and at first stage you should probably focus on them more than the general newsletters, websites, landing pages, etc.
Yeah, I think, I'll even add to that. I think as a business, as much as you can only rely on one singular message to one singular persona, you can obviously test it, but one site, one piece, one article should always convey a message to one specific persona. Now, in some cases, if I'm, let's say, if I'm a senior engineer, then I'm looking to get some quality content over, let's say, assume, I don't know, MongoDB. Then probably junior engineer or some architect would find some sort of interest in that. But if I'm very much looking into conveying the message to senior engineer, there are some assumptions I can make when writing this. And I think that's the best way to get to any persona, to be frank, right? It's not specifically for engineers.
Okay. All right. So let's just jump to the next one. Okay. So what are the best tools to communicate with developers in your eyes?
Yeah. So there are two ways of communication, one direct and the other one is more API driven, which developers expect to have. With direct, I think they're looking for something more straight out, not like having a support at yourdomain.com email that would give them an automated answer of thank you, we got your ticket, we will be back in a few business days, etc. It's not the way they're expecting to it. They're more to like to have something like Drift or Intercom for instant communication. Also, if we're thinking about communities, so things like Slack, Discord, things that the engagement is in their playground or the areas that they play with. Also, I would say GitHub is a good communication channel because you speak through issues, you speak through pull requests. It's a method of communication that also adds to that code into the software.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think everywhere you can talk about the actual problems in hand or the actual intellectual things they're trying to solve. Communication. Just look at the obvious example, Stack Overflow, right? It's a way to communicate with engineers all across the board about specific problems. And then there's GitHub, which is more repo-based communication, Discord for, you can look at every Discord channel or Reddit. It is organized to more of a professional type of communication, talking about code, talking about architecture, talking about new solution, new libraries. But there's more, light stuff and fluffy stuff, which a lot of engineers do like. More of a meme type, some crazy jokes about why I have no idea why my code is working. All of those types is part of engineering culture and engineering communication.
Yeah, so one thing that I see all the time is mostly those kind of long form threads over Twitter that describes different variants of tools, open source projects, etc. And actually, I would like maybe to get a bit like deep dive here. And would you really consider Twitter to be an place for receiving an actual education or an actual help?
I don't think it's help. I think Twitter is a best channel for developers for education, more to learn about new things, learn about what the community is speaking about, more being teased about what's going on out there.
Yeah, I think looking into how Twitter kind of works, it's very fast paced. It's to some extent you're expected to put 5, 6 tweets a day, maybe more. I don't know, and so it's extremely fast paced. And so, as Ron said, it's kind of gives you some ideas about what's going on right now. But usually, even if you see those 10, those threads with 20 tweets on them, it's primarily due to Twitter kind of blocks you for more than 20, 255 characters, which, it actually includes emojis and spaces. So you don't get that much of content out there. And then if you want to organize, let's say, 10 best JavaScript tricks or 10 most used utilities on Python, you kind of need to have those threads in order for people to actually consume it. But I mean, other than some, I don't know, status pages, updates, and stuff like that, I wouldn't necessarily go for Twitter to get some help as much as I would go for Discord, Stack Overflow, Reddit, stuff like that, or maybe GitHub if that's the way the company or project decided to handle this.
Got it. So, for as a person that kind of involved in the Novo account at Twitter, I know personally that one of the goals or one of the ways that I would like to use this channel is probably to send some kind of a snippets or teasers on the features that about to come, and to generate this kind of a feedback loop from people who are interested and following, for instance, Novo, for example, and understand how it how much it's actually is anticipated. So this some kind of a view that I at least see Twitter for companies, but I would like Ron to hear your opinion on the channels that you personally consume the most, like tech info, etc., in this kind of areas.
To me, I would say it's a few handpicked newsletters that I'm interested in. It's like it's usually not a company related newsletter. It's more of a specific persona that, for example, is very specialized in product or in engineering leadership, etc. The second one, I would say, it's similar to Twitter, but more on the professional network, like a general professional network, which is LinkedIn. That's where I consume most of my the other data. And then I would say everything else is kind of stacked at the same level, like Twitter, blogs, mediums, etc.
I think I'll add, in my case, some books which I regularly read. Some of them are not necessarily on new technology, but I think for engineers, so much has already been thought of about architectures and processes, and you don't necessarily need to reinvent everything. You can, but you don't necessarily need to. So reading books kind of gives you a good way to find about some of those forgotten ideas. And then we can easily give a shout out to our friends over at Daily Dev for giving us the most relevant content they can. And for the most part, it does actually work.
So our next question is, what motivates developers to use your product?
If you remember back then, I said that people are looking to solve problems, and engineers, almost 100% of them, looking for their problems in Google. So if you want them in the first place to use your product, you need to nail down what they're going to search for. For example, how do I send a notification to email? How do I troubleshoot problem in my Lambda function or whatever that you're doing? So first nail down that use case that you want to solve for them. And then, we will speak about onboarding, but overall, you need your product to integrate into their work style, lifestyle, scenarios. I mean, if I'm troubleshooting a problem and I'm expecting to get it to Slack because that's where I work, and then probably, get a fixed notification into my PagerDuty or anything else, it should be integrated or coupled into my methods in the organization, my work style, etc. So I think once you're doing both right, and obviously the onboarding, which we skip, that goes in between, that I'm finding your product all the way that I'm hooked in, you should be good. Engineers will use your product.
Got it. All right. So let's jump right to the next question. And this question is probably a bit more, requires a bit more structure. And I hope, Ran, that you could provide it. But what do you think are the steps for developers to go from checking your product into needing to buy it?
That's actually a good question. So when you start, let's assume you got into the product. Let's assume you've onboarded in the right way into the product. Means that you already reached your aha moment. Now you need to do a few more things. First and foremost, you need to convince other people in your organization that this solution makes an impact to you. Then there is budgeting. So pricing should be matching to his expectations, to the organization's expectations. Try to understand what the value looks like when your persona will convince the decision maker, his decision maker, to do so. And the last piece for a successful, way of buying is to increase the adoption. When you're speaking just about a single person, it's hard to get the word spread out in the organization. But if you're speaking about an entire team, like 4 or 5 people coming to the team lead and saying, look, this is the best solution, we must have it because 1, 2, 3, he wouldn't fight 5 people to not buy this. He would, convert as well and just try to buy it.
Right. I want to add something that I think I'd like to add here. I think a lot of the cases for engineers is saving time is actually it's a great value for them. Engineers not only by their actual job, every time they're not building and they're not building the company code, the company product, they're basically quote unquote wasting their time. And these individuals are actually very much value their time. We are, as engineers, we taught from really young age to, if you have to write a function, then write it once, use it more than once. And so you become kind of a lazy by nature, kind of value your time to a great extent. And so that's actually one of the easiest values to sell to engineers. It does not mean it's going to be easy to sell that to the organization, but it is an easy value to sell to most engineers.
Okay, so the next question is, what are the common mistakes did you make, Ron? And it could be probably something like inconsistent messaging or too much fluff. I mean, do you have any examples, something that you would like to share?
Yeah, actually, inconsistent messaging is one of the main problems that I see around, and also something that we suffered from. When you think about it, it should be simple. When I'm asking what's novel or what's Epsagon, it should be the same answer when you present it on stage, when an engineer answers it to his friend when they're going out to a bar, or when you're at a conference and salespeople say what's your product is doing. And many times it wasn't consistent. Everybody said something different. We're monitoring serverless. We're helping troubleshoot. When it's not consistent, the company suffers from it. And also when it becomes too fluff all across the board, when the answer is fluff. So fluff and inconsistencies are among the issues that we suffered.
So you kind of reminded me something by OpenView, OpenView partners, and then what specifically I'm talking about is they have this kind of how to sell to engineers handbook, something like that. And one of the biggest pitfall is a lot of companies trying to sell to engineers as they would sell to any other person. And most of the time, the actual people who are taking on those methodologies are engineers by trade, right? So the CEO might be an engineer. The one who is actually owning the messaging between the company are actually engineers. And the reason they're doing that is because they think that's the way you should message. That's the way you should do that. And so what happened is they're losing twice. The way they choose, the method they choose isn't actually the one they need to choose for engineers. And B is they are not as proficient as salesmen in doing so. And so they're losing it twice, and the actual messaging is the worst it could be. Even though they did all the processes correct, and to the extent it seems like everything is working, they're not actually conveying the message engineers want to get.
Do you think that this kind of an approach, it probably will be kind of mixed here, but the approach of explaining what you are doing, like to a 5-year-old, or like explaining to your grandma or something, is it kind of valid messaging strategy here?
I don't think so. While it's good to be able to explain it to a 5-year-old or my mom, engineers are looking for more to that and more accurate. So if you're saying, we're making the messages getting into their destination, that's an explanation to a 5-year-old. But an engineer would ask, oh, wait, what message? You mean an email? You mean an SMS? Get to the destination. How resilient is this? Is it an API driven? Is it a UI driven? So with engineers, you should pay more attention and put some more extra words to making it right.
Yeah, okay, love it. So the next question is probably a bit related to one of our previous questions, but I will still ask it. What is ongoing onboarding?
Oh, that's a great question. I mentioned that I'll speak to onboarding. So onboarding in general is what takes you from a sign up to an activation to a user that understands the value, got to the aha moment, etc. Now, when you think of it, products are not being used once. It's not like I sent a message and now, okay, I don't need to send more messages. Let's say even, potentially in this area, I sent a message from one application, one of my services, but I have 10 other different services. So potentially I need to onboard them as well. This is something like, the flywheel concept where you always, onboard new stuff. It also helps the expansion. And also think about another thing. Let's say I sent a message at Novu, and now I invited another friend, another engineer that is unaware what Novu is. For him, Novu is something that sends messages, but how is it working? Is it an API? Is it a product? So when I'm inviting him, you should expect to onboard him as well, just as he's been a new user, but to an existing account. So this concept of flywheel is important both for if I just want to add more stuff, or if I'm inviting a teammate that needs to understand how the product works.
And then I want to add something that's it's kind of an industry standard, but it shouldn't be. A lot of the time, thinking about onboarding, a lot of individuals think onboarding could be extremely generic. Onboarding needs to be very much accustomed to not only what you're doing, but to your actual users. And so we chose here at Novo to give onboarding mostly through our CLI. And the reason is CLI is a great solution. It's an easy solution for engineers. And if an engineer isn't accustomed with CLI, he might, or let's say not an engineer, if a potential users isn't accustomed with CLI, they might not be a good user. So onboarding does not only work for the actual end user to get what they need, it's a good filter mechanism for the company to make sure they're onboarding the correct users and they're able to support them to the needs they need.
Yeah, actually, it really makes sense. And one of the things that my job as a person who kind of working on the developer experience is also to enhance and to understand how to make the onboarding process much more smoother, seamless, and to see how we can improve. So, uh, like my 5 cents here is probably that the onboarding process and the ongoing onboarding should be all the time kind of refactored, reconsidered, and restructured to the manner that the user will be comfortable with it. Um, okay, so it's probably we kind of getting to one of our last questions, and that is, what do developers expect when they checked your, let's say, library or a website?
That's another awesome question. Um, so there are a few things you need to check the box when engineers are getting into the website. The first one, I think that it solves a need. They look for something on Google, and now they want to rest assured that this is what they looked for. So this starts with that. Then comes the credentials, like who else is using it? Am I familiar with different industries, different companies that can be relevant to that? So social proof is also great. The third thing is integrations. Is it integrating to my ecosystem? As I mentioned before, is it working with my Slack or Teams? Is it working with my Jira or GitHub, etc.? And I think that the last piece that engineers are looking at is pricing. They do expect to see some pricing, not necessarily on the on page itself, but having a pricing page is important because they do look for it. They do look to understand, okay, maybe now it's free because you're starting, but what's the pricing strategy? I need to understand. It's something that I need to convey, afterwards.
Yeah, I think looking into. So a couple of weeks back, we did some small of a test with 10, 20 engineers about what are they looking for, looking into Novu's website and Novu's GitHub. And first of all, social proofing, and it depends, right? Because for traditional product, it could be some testimonials, some big logos that might work. In GitHub, it might be stars, forks. So the actual social proofing tends to change a bit from whether or not it's a website or a GitHub or whatever that may be. But it's definitely a big part of it. The other thing that developers are looking at, at least on what we got, is you need to be able to convert the value really quickly. If they don't realize what the value is, technically, they're not going to keep on moving. The second part is going to be how much of an effort is that? Because if I'm going to be able to do that in one afternoon, or is it 3 months planning? Which type of a solution is that? And then the complementary value of the last one is let me see the docs. If I can't see the docs in a heartbeat, it's you are definitely not developer first. If I can't find like a 20 places to click on the docs, you might have missed me. And so when we went through those tests, we got it really quickly. I mean, first thing is, let me see the code snippet on how it works. After they read the tag and said, okay, I get what you're doing. It's interesting to me. Let me see the snippet on how it actually works. And the next thing was, let me see the docs. I want to see what I can get out of it, what's in that, what's not in that, what are the upcoming features, maybe. All that needs to be conveyed into the docs. Only then they're actually going to, we are an open source company, so they can basically download everything to their computers and play with it. But only then they're actually going through the hassle of registering, doing the next step you as a company or as a library expect for them. And then obviously there's this small, I would say, differentiation is if you already market default solution for that place, then you can do whatever, no one cares. But when you don't have that trust, and engineers, as we spoke earlier, are extremely untrusty individuals. Um, you need to earn the trust. It's not as easy as in sometimes other use cases. Then yeah, you need to convey value, you need to convey ease of use, and you need to convey docs in order for them to even consider.
All right. So we actually getting to the end of this episode. So I want to thank you, Ran and Tomer. And to end this recording, I actually would like, Ran, I would be happy to hear like in 30 seconds about some recommendations about maybe a piece of advice or a book or a movie, anything that you would like to recommend our listeners.
Yeah, so Tomer already bumped their name. If you're doing open source, if you're doing business to developers and potentially also product-led growth, uh, I'm really in love with OpenView Venture Capital. Their blog is amazing. They're writing so concrete content for such companies that help to understand how to do messaging, positioning, how to sell to developers, and how to communicate with them, how to build great products. I'm really in love with their blog. Every piece of it is super correct, super technical, super right.
We should try and get them over this podcast. That would be cool.
Yeah.
We absolutely will try. So again, thank you guys for being on this podcast. Again, I really appreciate it, and I really hope our listeners will enjoy and get something out of it.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you, everyone.